Welcome back to the Silurian. I'm your host, Gwayuonairus. Unlike the massive temperature lows that ended the Ordovician, the Silurian went out with more of a whimper. So what ended it? Well, Avalonia, Laurentia, and Baltica finally smashed together into the familiar Laurasia. No, Laurussia. Okay, point being, the Scottish Highlands are finally here in terms of climate. We've recovered from the lows of the Ordovician extinction, and now there's a new challenge on the horizon, the clonk. So because greenhouse gases get released when it's hot and frozen when it's cold, and also snow has a libido or something, temperature is bounded by feedback loops on both sides, dependent on geology, and tends to pendulum pretty hard. The clonk event is volcanic outgassing of CO2 that brings the momentum back towards higher temperature, keeping things nice and warm for our ancestors. So, who are they? Well, the 7 groups I've established earlier aren't enough anymore, and that's after I already expanded the 5 from the Ordovician. So who are the newest groups, and who should we care about from them? The Reef Builders. The sponges have been gaining a decisive victory over the coral, so much so that they will be included in this video. Why aren't you getting excited? Graptolites finally kicked it. Nomo diddy nomo graptus. Echinoderms. Yes, I promised we'll do crinoids in this video. We'll do crinoids! Trilobites just keep coming. No signs of them going away in the near future. They continue pretty much the same as they did 4 videos ago back in the Cambrian. New additions are going to be Terataspis, the Devil Amest, Phacops, the Glaring Amest, Drotops is the Thorny Amest, and Eldregiops is the Berber Amest. Mandibulates are arthropods whose teeth go side to side. The main 3 of these are the myriapods, the first set on land, the crustaceans, who are still in the water, to this day actually. The newest set is insects, who finally made it onto land. There's a bit of a gap in the fossil record here, so the only new addition is Maldibulachia, the freshwater sumite. Oh, hey, that's new. Animals aren't restricted to marine environments anymore. Chelicerates are arthropods whose teeth go up and down. Sea scorpions are mostly in the water, but some of them made it onto land. We call this new group scorpions. Spiders also made it onto land, but horseshoe crabs are still in the water to this day. New sea scorpion additions are Hippertoptopus, the creeping revenant, and Halictorus, the spider revenant. New horseshoe crab is Cassibellinurus, the coastal moonshell. If you're going to make it onto land or into freshwater, now is the era to do it. No matter how bad it is on the surface, at least you don't have to compete with trilobites, God's perfect organism. Worms, snails, and brachiopods are still fighting the good fight, but even they'll eventually be forced onto land. The nautiloids are making a triumphant comeback by learning how to wrap the shell around itself instead of a giant straight line, with the new name Ammonites. The old fish, just the placoderms and acanthodians, have also been evolving into... Come on, it's been one era! Why did they evolve this fast? Well, the main reason is that they have a ton of Hox genes, so they have a more intimate control over their embryonic stages, and so mutations are less likely to be deadly. Well, now the small group of fish has expanded into the ancient jawless fish, the armored placoderms, the spiny acanthodians, the cartilaginous sharks, the bony true fish, the hollow coelacanths, and the fleshy fishapods. No wonder they call this era the Age of Fishes. We'll cover all the new entries as quickly as possible. Astracoderms, we have Cephalaspis, the drunken almager, referencing its bottom-feeding behavior. Acanthodians, we have Diplocanthus, the double-spined call, Angelicanthus, the Zulu call, and Triazugacanthus, the guardian call. It's known from its embryonic stages. And of course, the poster boy for the Devonian was a placoderm. Other placoderms include Bothriolepis, the flathead gemple, and McNamaraspis, the Perth gemple. It's the state fossil of Western Australia. And of course, the king, the one-man army, the little navy Dunkleosteus, is the armadillo gemple. Yeah, that looked lame when I wrote it, but when I say it out loud, it just fits together. I like it. Crinoids. So, echinoderms generally invite comparison to the human hand, mostly because of the 5 points. At this time, even the most humanoid of hands have 7 fingers, but crinoids have a stalk resembling an arm, and mostly have a multiple of 5 arms. Crinoids weren't just your average hands, though. They did almost rule the world. They survived every extinction. They're still here today. Crinoids are hands reaching upwards, pleading with the heavens for a mercy that they received. Does any of this make sense? I'm going to call them the Reachers. They're found worldwide. Technically, they do already have a common name, sea lilies, but nobody cares about that. The PIE root would be hreid, potentially hridos, though that is just Proto-Germanic rikaj, Old English rik, English rik. That's fine, I didn't really want to go with a straight English name. So, in Norse, or Norse-influenced Old English, we could certainly include os, as, for head and reacher, god reacher. From there, the probably rhoticizes like we see in iron, Iron, and we get modern English Aric from Norse and Auric from English. I like Eric better. So let's cover 3 periods worth of crinoids real quick. Glyptocrinus is the sheltered Eric, Kalidocrinus is the resplendent Eric, Cyathocrinites is the lotus Eric, Cupersocrinites is the copper Eric, Demerocrinites is the hand-drawn Eric, Eucalyptocrinites is the amest Eric, Siphocrinis is the cerulean Eric, and Actinocrinites is the bullion Eric. You know, it's fun with poorly known animals because I can just make up whatever adjectives I think sound cool. So who's up next? Bugs. At this point, bugs hadn't yet evolved all the big important features that distinguish them from other invertebrates. At this point, you are here. They're beginning to develop wings. Right now, the major highlights are that they only have 6 legs, hence the name, and that they proudly display their mouth parts on the outside, hence the other name. And they also have 3 body segments, hence you get the point. The most comparable creature nowadays would probably be silverfish, the so-called bridge insects, or some sister group to true insects, but I wouldn't be doing this if they were too comparable. They kind of go underrepresented in the fossil record, so I want to give them a modern name, similar to, well, like silverfish or springtail. I guess the other reason I want to do that is because it's very often how arthropods are named. So, what did they do? Well, they tried to fly, at least. The evolution of flight is much spottier than we'd like it to be, but it's something people care about very much, so there's good theories. Evolution of flight in general is confusing because half a wing doesn't do anything for flight, so it has to go through a repurposing stage, which is why they've only ever evolved 4 times. One of the most convincing theories is that they had gills, or some sort of extension from the thorax to regulate heat, or most likely a combination of both, so they had something with very high surface area on the back. I'm gonna go with backpack worms. Trust me, I've talked about worms for 50 minutes on this channel. This is absolutely a reasonable name. So, Rhiniella is the northern backpack worm, and Strudiella is the split-faced backpack worm. Now, sharks, in the popular imagination, tend to be big fish because they don't really have the buoyancy to get smaller, an assumption that, to be fair, has resounded throughout most of history, except for a problematic period in the Jurassic. Of course, during the Devonian, the armadillo Gemple was king, everyone scattered. Dunkleosteus was the lion, sharks had to be the hyenas. Except they didn't really hunt in packs, so they were more like foxes or coyotes. But back to etymology. Nowadays, all sharks share a common name, except dogfish, I guess, and are distinguished by 2 adjectives, if that. So I guess that pads the number of names I'm giving out, doesn't it? So Phoebodontiforms are very snaky. Snakes don't exist yet, and neither do eels. So the best we can do is the early chordates from the Cambrian. So Phoebodus is the dread shark, and Thrinacidus is the whistling dread shark. Ctenacanthiforms are very modern shark-like, with the characteristic nose poking out over the jaw. Because of the curvature of the fin, I will call Ctenacanthus the plastic shark. Squatinactus is flat and kind of on its way to becoming a ray. I will take a page out of the same book as earlier and call it the drunken shark. Samoriforms have questionable fins and hairdos. They're already sometimes called anvil sharks. I'll make Samorium the Arctic anvil shark and Stethocanthus as the Indian anvil shark. And finally, the Cladocelatiforms are technically chimeras, aka ratfish, not sharks, and so are the anvil sharks, but whatever. So I'll do a callback to what I was mentioning earlier and call them foxfish. That is already a thing. Wolffish. Dogfish? There are too many kinds of fish. Okay, jackalfish works well, actually. So Cladoselash is the black jackalfish, and Magriboselash is the golden jackalfish. Probably would be also just black and white, but let a man dream. Fishapod is a massively paraphyletic term to refer to any lobe-fin fish that tried to make it onto land but didn't make it in time, though it becomes monophyletic if you add in the group that did make it. These are overwhelmingly concentrated in Arctic, Canada, and Greenland. In fact, the most famous of these, Tiktaalik, is already a common name on some levels, an Inuktitut word for shallow water fish. It's not very realistic for an English loanword being discovered in 2004 when Inuktitut had a writing system and a whole journal for preservation. If it was loaned during the messy system of 16th century Hudson Bay Inuit contact like igloo or kayak, it would probably be clipped to something like Tiktaalik or just Taalik. Or maybe TikTok, but I don't really want to do TikTok. So Taalik it is. Tiktaalik can be the Tiktaalik. Aren't you glad you waited for this section? To be honest, I do think Tiktaalik has to keep its name. It's too possible. Whatever. Panderichthyes is the spotted talik, and Ventostega is the split-fin talik. Acanthostega is the 8-fingered talik, and Ichthyostega is the 7-fingered talik. Spiders are still suffering under the overwhelming lack of a fossil record for any invertebrates. It really just is the age of fishes for so many reasons. Irregardlessly, we do have 2 solid genera, so we have to do this for Uraraca, or whatever its name is. So spiders do have a similar thing going for them as sharks, in theory, though the ones using a noun can drop the spider and just be 2 unrelated words. The ones with an adjective stay as spiders. So what are they doing in the Devonian? Well, not making webs. Yet, they do have silk glands, but no spinnerets, so it just kind of dribbles out of them. This is useful for covering up eggs or making a nest, but you can't catch flying bugs with it. Also, bugs can't fly yet, so probably something like shell or shield. Even though we haven't developed choria, after reviewing my options, I've decided the best option is the eggshell spider. Atercopus is the American eggshell spider, and Permarachne is the Comey eggshell spider. Perm and Comey are close to each other. They border. Ammonites are named after the Egyptian god Amun, not the ancient tribe from the Bible, nor after the guy from the Book of Mormon, which wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, at this point, Ammonites are most well known a little off the coast of Morocco. Now, the Arabs didn't take Morocco until the 8th century, with it being controlled by the Vandals, Byzantines, Romans, and Carthaginians throughout its turbulent history. The most likely candidate, I think, is some Berber term that was then passed around by various occupying forces. So, in this Tamazight dictionary, the root for being round or circular is dur. The words for round and circle already absorb the 2D verbals for this, though we could go for an adjectival, adauran or adwaran, which drifts to being a noun meaning ammonite. Latin changes it to adwarans or adwaranus, probably the former if it stays as an adjective. Vandalic tends to like softening the D, so adwaras or adwaris doesn't seem out of the question. Arabic would change that to aswaris. Spanish aswaris is reanalyzed as the plural, singular aswari, English aswari. So, Clemenia is the typhoon aswari, Platyclaminia is the flat aswari, and Armatites is the zebra aswari. And that leaves some room for early bony fish. As I brought up in the first video in the series, fish have weird names with diverse etymologies, so I'm going to go with Dutch, Greek, and Murinpatha. Now, with placoderms as the apex predators, sharks as the smaller, flightier carnivores, fish are taking the role closest to flighty herbivores. Ecologically, at least. Trophically, nothing aquatic gets to be an herbivore until mammals arrive. Their scales are still mostly developed to protecting their skull rather than aquadynamics, so I will give the first one Chirolepis, the PIE name Trechtwos, the rough one. That's Proto-Germanic drogwaj, Middle Dutch drug, English drug, making Chirolepis the Welsh drug. Moithomasia had more flexible ganoid scales, so will be called turned around, which is epistraphes, English epistrophe, making Moithomasia the Mediterranean epistrophe, and Mimipiscus is just fish because my dictionary is limited, specifically Ngalarnarn, which is adapted to Yalarn. Mimipiscus is the Tasmanian Yalarn. Thanks for watching. Oh, I forgot the stomatoporoid sponges. They can be the coral sponges because they kind of did what corals did. We might touch on sponges again in the Jurassic. See you next week after everything freaking dies.